Hey friends, it's Sam, and today I'm going to show you how to make not one, not two, but 3 DIY yard games. Let's get started. I'll take it. This project is sponsored by my awesome friends at the Home Depot. Friends, welcome to the garage shop. I think this is the first project that we're doing in my garage shop, which is so exciting. Also, like, I say garage shop really lightly right now because it's really like a garage blanket fort. Ta-da! My garage door is stuck in the up position, completely broken. My new door doesn't come for another month. We are going to be building in a blanket fort, if blanket forts were made of tarps. So I'm really excited about this project because if you missed my announcement in my deck makeover video, Chris and I are gonna be hosting our wedding in our backyard in a couple of months. It's coming up really fast. What is a good backyard wedding without some yard games? Am I right? But I wanted to do something really fun. I wanted to do something that wasn't gonna take me that long either. So we are going to be making 3 yard games in 3 days. These yard games are not going to be too complicated because I don't have a lot of tools in this workshop. In fact, most of my tools are literally in a box right there. It's going to be great. Let's get started. I'm excited. I am so excited about today's project specifically because I've never made one before and because it's Chris's favorite board game, period. I was gonna save the best for last, but let's just go with the best for first. Today we're gonna make a giant Connect 4 board. Couple things. One is I'm actually talking to you on camera and it's making me like this about how cluttered it is behind me. It's so weird to be recording in this garage instead of in my shed shop, but eventually we'll get to this project too. I'm getting started pretty early in the day on this project because I have a feeling that it's gonna take me literal hours to drill all of the holes I need to drill for this Connect 4 board. It's gonna be fine. I have seen a couple of plans online for this specific build. I'm kind of like combining a couple, but also adding my own touches, mostly because of the availability of materials right now. I kind of wanted to get my hands on whatever I could get my hands on for this build, which meant that I had to tweak a couple of dimensions, but I think it's gonna be great. I will link the plans that I use for this below this video in the video description, and I can also make my own if anybody is interested. Let me know in the comments. I think that this one is going to be a full 1-day build, so let's get started. All right, friends, let's build because that's way more fun than talking. So like I mentioned, I used plans that I found online. In fact, I kind of morphed a couple of plans together to create the board that I made here. I will link those below this video. But first things first, I had to cut a bunch of 1x4s into different pieces for the legs and the sides of the Connect 4 board. And I also decided to add a tiny little decorative miter to the ends of the legs, and this will also prevent anybody from like tripping over it or hurting themselves on a corner of the bottom of the game board. Once those pieces were cut though, I then focused my attention on the base of the game board because I wanted to kind of pre-build and pre-stain everything. For this, I decided to go with a pseudo mortise and tenon joint where I added 2 blocks of wood that would essentially hug the leg later and then nail those and glue those to the supports. You will definitely see how this all comes together a little later. It makes sense, I promise. But in the meantime, I pre-stained everything using an outdoor wood stain and then set those aside to dry and moved on to the game board. Check-in time. I think that works. Okay, this is so awkward. I want to talk real quickly about the game pieces and the layout of this Connect 4 game. I'm actually using cork coasters for my game pieces, like that. And the reason I'm using these is because I don't feel like cutting out game pieces, to be quite honest. I kind of like that they're like flexible and they're going to be durable and I don't have to do much work. I'm just going to spray paint these. But a lot of the plans that I was seeing online for the Connect 4 game were using 5-inch or 6-inch circles. Because of that, I have the unfortunate task of doing some math today and figuring out realistically what my layout of this game is going to be. So because these are 4-inch coasters, I am using a 3.5-inch hole saw for my cutouts. That way, when you slide these into the actual game, the actual hole itself is smaller than the coaster, so that the coaster doesn't like pop out of the hole. So I'm gonna go measure that out and kind of like figure out what I'm gonna do for that, and then I'm gonna drill a million holes. in this game piece. I've charged like 6 batteries for my drill for this. Hopefully it doesn't run out of juice. Hopefully I don't run out of juice. I'm probably gonna end up having to take like a snack break halfway through, but we'll figure it out. But yeah, so this is the part of the project I've been looking forward to the least. Let's get started. So because I'm visual, I decided to lay out the game pieces along with wooden spacers to figure out the math, and that actually worked really well. It's a little smaller than I was hoping, but honestly, I'd rather it be smaller and like look right. So I'm gonna mark this, and then I'm gonna trim this plywood up on my table saw and then drill a lot of holes. Now, spoiler alert, I like to keep things real around here, so I am going to let you know in advance that I ended up changing things up and the size of the hole saw up and the measurements up before actually drilling these holes, but you'll see that in a little bit. In the meantime though, I did bring that plywood over to my table saw and cut it down to the size that I needed for my game board before drilling anything. I then did some maths to figure out where all of the holes were gonna go, and before I drilled, I did decide to take a quick snack break and think it all over because food helps everything. Wow, friends. Why did I think you could see me? Hey, can you see me? I am so happy that I took a snack break because I had this idea in my head to actually use a smaller hole saw to make these cuts so that there's more space in between each opening on the board, and I just like relayed that out off camera to see what it would look like. It looks so much better. I'm gonna use a 3-inch hole saw to make all of these cuts, and I'm still not looking forward to making all of these cuts, but at least I figured this all out over a snack break before I started making cuts, so let's do this. So I'm not gonna lie, in hindsight, looking back at this, it's really funny that I was whining so much about cutting these holes because I was legitimately able to do all of this in about 15 minutes. The hole saw was able to power through the 2 sheets of 1/4-inch plywood like a champ. I will say though, there was a decent amount of tear out, and I do think that a large part of that is because the plywood that I used was not the greatest quality plywood, but it was what I could get my hands on for this project. If I were to ever build this project again in the future, and I'm going to be quite honest with you, I probably will rebuild this for the wedding, I would use completely different plywood. I will link the plywood that I think would be best for this project. The panels that I used ended up being just like very flaky and they didn't sand well, and you'll kind of see that a little bit in the final beauties that I couldn't get it to be completely smooth, but it is what it is, and this is a learning experience, and I still think it turned out really rad, and yeah. Also, side note, sorry about the lighting. Clearly this garage shop needs some help. Woo! Now, to help make the holes look a little neater, I decided to go in with my router and a round over bit to add a really neat round over to all of the holes before sanding down the entire sheet of plywood. Like I mentioned, I kind of felt like no matter how much I sanded, I was still getting these like weird fuzzy things because the plywood just wasn't the best, but it is what it is. Anyway, after that, I moved on to adding spacers in between each one of the rows using some scrap pieces of plywood, and then I connected them all together with wood glue and brad nails. I also filled in all of the nail holes with wood putty and gave it one final sanding, and next up it was time for finishing touches. Now, I partnered up with the Home Depot and BEHR to use their BEHR Premium spray paints on all 3 of these yard games, and I really wanted some fun colors for this project in particular, so I used their Beyond Navy for one team's colors, and then their No More Drama, which is honestly the best name ever for a spray paint, in this cool gloss red for the other team. As those game pieces dried in between coats, I moved on to spraying the actual game board itself using flat white from BEHR. What I like the most about this spray paint is that it has a built-in primer, which means way less coats, which makes it perfect for a one-day project. Once everything dried, it was time to assemble the legs to the base and the actual game board itself to the legs using screws. And the last step I wanted to do was just add a piece on the bottom with a little latching mechanism so that you can remove it so the game pieces can fall out of the bottom of the board just like in real life Connect 4. And just like that, in one day of work, we have a giant Connect 4 game to play at our backyard wedding, and I'm stoked about it. But like I promised at the beginning of this video, we do have 2 more games to make, so let's get started. So now we're gonna get started on making a DIY cornhole, or like bags filled with corn that you throw at a board with a hole, whatever you choose to call it. We're gonna be making one of those today. I'm really excited about this because I actually used to sell a decent amount of custom cornhole boards when I was in college to help pay my rent. So it was like honestly the ideal side hustle for my side hustle, if that makes any sense. I used to make them for backyard ceremonies, restaurants. They're just really easy to make and super customizable. And these games are awesome. You can knock out a custom set in a couple of hours. So let's do it. Of all of the yard games I made, this was arguably the one I was most excited about because I am able to knock out a solidly decent cornhole set in a few hours, if I must say so myself. This is a super easy project, and actually I'm going to show you a little trick in a little bit to make it even easier. But before we get ahead of ourselves, first thing I did was cut all of my frame pieces from 2x4s, and I also cut out some legs by angling the bottom of the leg and using my jigsaw to round over the top. You'll see how this plays in later. Once all of my pieces were cut and ready to roll, I then moved on over to assembling the actual frame for the cornhole set, and I did this using wood glue and screws and just filled in any of those screw holes with some wood putty. I have a secret weapon that didn't exist when I was making these as a side hustle for my side hustle. Boom! They now made plywood that already comes with a hole in it for your cornhole sets, which is amazing because it's so time saving, but they're definitely a little more expensive than buying the plywood and cutting it yourself. Arguably though, if you don't have a 6-inch hole saw or a jigsaw, it actually might be cheaper to buy this. I'm actually super stoked about this because this is a very clean cut that is going to save me a lot of time. Because this is already pre-cut, I can go ahead and start the finishing process on this. My vision for this set is a really healthy mix of some stain and some super fresh spray paint colors. So I'm gonna get started by pre-staining this board and the second one that I have here. Let that dry. While that dries, we're gonna sand the frame, and then we're gonna get started on actually customizing this set. Let's go. Just like I did with the Connect 4 board, I did use an exterior stain on these cornhole sets. I didn't want anything too rich though, so I did end up putting on a pretty healthy coat and then wiping away any extra and then letting that dry. Now, you all know how much I love multitasking and dividing and conquering to save some time, so while that dried, I moved on to sanding and painting the base and the legs as well. For the base of this project, I used BEHR spray paint in Orion Gray, and I really liked this color a lot. It's really steely, if that makes any sense. Like, really does look almost like a steel color, and it just made the entire frame pop really well against the design, which you'll see in a little bit. Now, while that dried, it was time to move on to the dried top and then add my design for that as well. I used a lot of painter's tape here to make some really neat geometric lines, and then I alternated between a couple of different colors for this top portion of the project. I started with hands down what was my favorite color of any of these projects, this toasty gray color. I want to spray paint this color all over my life. And very shortly after spraying it, I then removed the tape, allowed that layer to dry, and then added some new layers of stripes using flat black and antique copper spray paints from BEHR. As the top of the board cured, it was time to move on to attaching the legs to the frame. As you can see, this is why I had to round over the edge of the legs earlier in this process, and I attached them to the sides using a lag bolt, a wing nut, and a couple of washers. And it's really important to make sure that the leg can turn completely without poking out of the opposite end of that frame, because that's the part of the frame where the top will be attached. And since the BEHR spray paint can be used on metal as well, I also decided to spray that bolt to make it blend in. Last up was to glue and nail the top of the board to the frame, and that was it. In a few hours, I had a custom cornhole set for my wedding. Alright, so now that we tackled this second yard game in this 3-yard game in 3 days series, let's move on to game number 3, which is actually a game I had never played before making this video, so let's get started. Okay friends, we are back in the garage shop, and it is time for our last yard game of the not 1, but 2, but 3, yes I can count to 3, yard games that we're making in this video. So I'm going to be tackling a game I've actually never played before. It's ladder golf, or I've also seen it as like ladder toss as well. I've seen this game played and made and sold a couple of different ways. I've seen it sold with 2 sets of ladders, like you have 1 set here and 1 set here, and then you have 2 teams and they toss golf balls at each other's ladders. And then I've also seen it played with 1 ladder, and then you have 2 people standing here, and then they like toss the golf ball on the ladder. Wow, that was just very, you get the picture. Because I'm making a whole bunch of yard games for this wedding, and because our yard is not that big, I am going to opt for the second option where I just make 1 ladder and then have the 2 teams stand on this side and then toss their golf balls at the ladder, if that makes sense. Because I'm only doing 1, this should go pretty quickly. If you do want to make a set that has 2 ladders, I will link the plans that I am using for this build below this video, because I am using plans from the Home Depot website that are actually really helpful. Like I said, this is a pretty quick and easy one. I think we're gonna knock this one out pretty fast. So the faster that we get this done, the faster we can party. So let's get started. Well, the first step in any good project is misplacing your tape measure and having to look for it for a solid $5, and then once you find it, you can start your project, you know what I mean? But yeah, so once I found my tape measure and I gathered all my supplies, I started by cutting a bunch of 1x4 boards down into the base and the sides, and then I also cut a couple of dowels into the 3 rungs that I will need for this project. Next up, I decided to use my jigsaw to round over the edges of the 2 side pieces as well as the top of the legs. And the legs and the base I actually assembled the same way that I assembled the Connect 4 game back at the beginning of this video. Just like the other projects, I did decide to stain these in the same exact exterior stain color and allow them to dry. This was really great because it actually makes all of the games feel like they are part of a set, which reality they are part of a set. And while those pieces dried, I then moved on to a really fun thing I've never done before, which was drilling holes in golf balls to make the actual game pieces for this project. Side note, did you know that golf balls have different color interiors? Because I didn't, and my mind was kind of blown. Anyway, once those golf balls, or bolas as they're called in the game, were ready to roll, I then spray painted 1 team's bolas in the color Surf in this really fun chalk paint that I want to use for everything, and the other team got a blazing bonfire color, which was pretty rad. Also, side note, so BEHR spray paints are really great for adhering to wood and plastic and metal, but I'm pretty sure that we can now officially add golf balls to that list as well. But anyway, while those dried, I moved on to assembling the legs and the base using some wood screws, and then I also attached the dowels using wood screws as well. And don't you worry, because I made sure to look up what regulation height was for every single one of these rungs before getting started. So each rung is worth a different amount of points, and I thought it might be fun to spray paint them in basically like gold, silver, and bronze, and that's exactly what I did. I used a BEHR metallic vintage gold up top, opted for a metallic dark steel in the middle, and then finished off that bottom rung in a metallic antique copper. I then removed all of the tape and allowed this to dry, and it was almost time to party, but there was 1 step left. Last step was to cut some regulation-sized rope to tie into knots on each side of these golf balls, and we were ready to officially play some ladder golf. I've literally never played this before. How do you throw this thing? It's so weird. Oh, yes! That was dope. Okay, I like this game. I made up my mind. I really had a lot of fun taking some time off from home renovations to create these fun yard games in 3 days of work for our backyard wedding next month. And I actually cannot wait to really watch my friends and family enjoy these games with me. I really hope that you all liked this little mini woodworking series of some fun one-day builds. If you did, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell for more projects in the very near future. But in the meantime, friends, thank you all for being so awesome, for being so supportive, for being so stoked about our cool news about our wedding. And I cannot wait to be able to hang with you and do some more projects with you soon. But until then, friends, happy DIYing.